For centuries, darkness meant safety, until someone learned how to see through it. It was supposed to be safe. The forest was completely dark. No moonlight, no artificial lights, no visible movement. For Soviet soldiers, this was the moment they trusted the most. Night had always been protection. Darkness meant concealment. It meant the enemy could not see, could not aim, could not move with confidence. That belief had been reinforced through years of training and doctrine. Then the Americans moved, not slowly, not cautiously. They moved as if it were daylight. For decades, both sides of the Cold War accepted one fundamental rule of warfare: night limited, everyone equally. When the sun went down, vision failed, fear increased, and movement became uncertain. Darkness was a natural barrier that no army could fully overcome. In the Soviet Union, American technology was often described as exaggerated, inflated by propaganda to intimidate rather than reflect reality. Claims that US forces could see in total darkness were dismissed as psychological warfare, not fact. Behind closed doors, however, the United States was quietly rewriting that rule. Instead of trying to defeat darkness with bright lights, military researchers focused on something far more subtle. They realized that even the darkest environments were not truly dark. Moonlight, starlight, and ambient reflections still existed. If that faint light could be captured and amplified, the night could be transformed into something visible. Early attempts at night vision had existed before the Cold War, most notably during World War II. German forces experimented with infrared systems that relied on active illumination. The equipment was bulky, unreliable, and impractical for widespread use. To many observers, it confirmed that night vision was an interesting concept, but not a realistic battlefield tool. That conclusion lingered into the early Cold War years, reinforcing skepticism on both sides. What changed everything was the development of passive image intensification. These new devices did not emit light. Instead, they captured tiny amounts of existing light and amplified it thousands of times. The result was an unnatural green image that revealed shapes, terrain, and movement where the human eye saw nothing. By the late 1950s and early 1960s, this technology was no longer theoretical. It worked, and it worked reliably. For American soldiers encountering it for the first time, the experience was unsettling. Men who had spent their entire careers fearing the night suddenly found themselves able to see through it. Trees appeared with sharp outlines, paths became visible, human figures emerged from darkness without warning. Many described the sensation as eerie, as if the environment itself had changed. The battlefield no longer behaved according to familiar rules. When these devices were deployed in real combat environments, particularly during the Vietnam War, their impact became impossible to ignore. Jungle terrain that once provided cover after sunset no longer guaranteed safety. Movement that would have gone unnoticed was now exposed. For opposing forces, the experience was deeply confusing. Soldiers reported being detected despite perfect darkness. Some assumed flares or illumination rounds had been used. Others suspected informants. Few immediately considered that the Americans could simply see them. Stories of these encounters spread quickly, but without clear explanations. To Soviet military planners and advisors, reports of American soldiers moving confidently through pitch-black terrain sounded exaggerated. Darkness had always been a universal limitation. The idea that one side had quietly removed that limitation was difficult to accept. Intelligence reports began to suggest otherwise: intercepted communications, battlefield observations, and later testimonies pointed to the same conclusion. American forces were no longer constrained by nightfall. They could observe, maneuver, and engage while their opponents remained effectively blind. What had once sounded like science fiction was revealing itself as reality. For Soviet soldiers and advisors who later described these moments, the shock was personal rather than theoretical. They had grown up believing that darkness imposed equal vulnerability on everyone. Watching an enemy move with certainty in total darkness felt unnatural. It challenged not only military doctrine, but basic expectations about how the world worked. The psychological impact was profound. Darkness had always provided a sense of safety, a temporary pause in danger. When that disappeared, fear took its place. Soldiers could no longer rely on night to protect them. Every shadow became threatening, not because it concealed the enemy, but because the enemy might already be watching. As the Cold War progressed, night vision technology continued to evolve. Devices became smaller, clearer, and more reliable. By the 1980s, American military doctrine fully embraced night operations. Darkness was no longer an obstacle. It was an advantage. Training emphasized fighting at night as a way to maintain dominance when opponents were least prepared. From the Soviet perspective, this shift was deeply unsettling. Military strategies had been built around assumptions that no longer held true. The realization that the enemy could operate freely at any hour forced a reassessment of long-standing beliefs. It also reinforced a growing awareness that Western technological development was accelerating faster than expected. What made night vision especially disturbing was how quietly it changed everything. There was no public announcement, no dramatic demonstration. The night simply stopped behaving the way it always had. Soldiers learned this not from briefings, but from experience. They learned when they were detected without explanation. They learned when movement that should have been invisible suddenly was not. To those who witnessed this transition firsthand, it felt like facing an enemy with an unnatural advantage, not because of greater numbers or firepower, but because of perception itself. Seeing what others could not see altered the balance of power in subtle but irreversible ways. By the end of the Cold War, night vision had become standard equipment. Its earlier mystique faded as it became routine. But for those first soldiers who realized the enemy could see them in total darkness, the moment was unforgettable. It was the point at which something that sounded like science fiction revealed itself as reality. And in that moment, the night lost its power.